Well, on a day like this, some 2,000 years ago, pilgrims, many people would be heading into Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. Now, you may have been given a sheet like this as you came in. Adults too, yes, they were for you as well. If not, there's some in the foyer, and you can duck out and get them. I think there's the kids' version left, but they are the same, it's just bigger. So 3 sheets like this, or 1 page, double-sided. And maybe you've got a pen or a crayon or a pencil. Again, they are in the foyer available. Maybe Matt can hand some of those out, and I've got some down the front as well. Because during the next hour, we're going to be working through the story of Jesus' death in these 10 images which are on your sheets, with verses on the back or on the separate sheet for you to do some detective work, if you like, to match the verses to the images as we make our way through this great story, this significant story of Jesus' death. Well, as I said, on a day like this, some 2,000 years ago in Jerusalem, it was the time of the Jewish Passover, and pilgrims would have gathered, many thousands of them, flooding into the city. And Jesus comes in across the Kidron Valley into the city of Jerusalem. And he'd come to make, as the video said, to make all things new, to put bad things good again, to make the wrong right. And as he comes into the city, he's come to finish that very job. He'd agreed with his Father God not just to go to a city, but to go to a cross. And the leaders and the officials, they put Jesus on trial, and they're trying to judge, well, does this man really deserve death? And false witness after false witness is brought in, and they can't find a case against Jesus until 2 witnesses agree on something of a changed version, a misquote of Jesus' words that would have him tried for blasphemy. And all through this trial and these moments, Jesus remains silent until the high official asks, "Are you the Christ, the Son of God?" And Jesus breaks his silence at that moment and says, "You have said so." And he's charged with blasphemy, deserving death. The Romans crucified criminals. They were good at it. No one would do the crimes again, was their hope, if they watched someone crucified for a particular crime. Jesus had not done any crime. And after 2,000 years, we still remember that death, even though one of the purposes of the Roman crucifixion was that people would forget the person even. It would just be wiped from the record. They would be wiped from the record. Jesus is remembered 2,000 years on. And then early in the morning, the rooster crows, and the Jewish chiefs and the leaders have gathered together early. They've met together to work out how they will have this Jesus killed, executed. He's bound up, he's led, and he's handed over to the governor of the region, a man named Pilate, the Roman governor. And then as we have our first reading now, that's the background. And so we're going to read different sections throughout our service today, and I'll say a few words on each, looking at 3 particular characters and their perspective on the story. Let's have our first reading from verse 11 to 26. It'll come up on the screen. If you do have a Bible there, you might like to get it out for it. We're going to have that read for us now.
Meanwhile, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "You have said so," Jesus replied. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Then Pilate asked him, "Don't you hear the testimony they are bringing against you?" But Jesus made no reply, not even to a single charge, to the great amazement of the governor. Now it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. At that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, "Which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who is called the Messiah?" For he knew it was out of self-interest that they had handed Jesus over to him. While Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat, his wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. "Which of the two do you want me to release to you?" asked the governor. "Barabbas," they answered. "What shall I do then with Jesus, who is called the Messiah?" Pilate asked. They all answered, "Crucify him." "Why? What crime has he committed?" asked Pilate. But they all shouted all louder, "Crucify him." When Pilate saw that he was getting nowhere, but that instead an uproar was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." All the people answered, "His blood is on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas to them, but he had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified.
Thanks, Forrest. If we hear different perspectives on a story, if we interview different people who were part of something or saw something, we'd get a different perspective on the events, wouldn't we? A fuller perspective. And so that's what we're going to do. So when we hear many accounts, we hear many feelings, we hear many emotions, and together all those things give us this deeper and richer understanding of what it might have been like to be there at that moment for whatever the story that's being told. That's what we want to do in this story of Jesus, as we look at these different responses, these 10 stories of one story, 10 perspectives on the moments right before Jesus' death and immediately after, the Good Friday story. And as I said earlier, we'll work through it in a few parts with a few angles, a few perspectives each time on this most remarkable and significant event. And first we meet this man. Pontius Pilate is the Roman governor, the provincial ruler over Jerusalem. His charge is basically keep the order, keep peace. He's a powerful dude. He's got the power of life and death, bar an appeal to Caesar. And so what will he do with this Jesus who has been causing such a stir? Crowds gathering, he's been hearing about him. Is he leading some kind of uprising? What will Pilate do with this man who's now been handed over to him, to his responsibility by the Jewish elites? Verse 11, the governor Pilate asked Jesus, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus replies, "You have said so." And then he's accused by the Jewish chiefs again and says nothing, remains silent until verse 13. Pilate checks that Jesus has heard, but again he stays silent. And by the time we get down a little later in the narrative, verse 24, Pilate seems to think that Jesus doesn't actually deserve death, that the crowds are wild, an uproar has started, which is ironic given what Jesus may be on charge even for. And so we read, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd. "I am innocent of this man's blood," he said. "It is your responsibility." And he orders Jesus to be flogged and then crucified. Is Pilate really innocent? He wants to be. But I think we could say that Jesus' death happened, at least for one reason, because Pilate didn't keep control of the crowd, which was his job. He wishes he could be innocent, but it's not that simple. A governor of a whole region can't just hand over the duties of justice to the crowd, as he's fearful of them, even. And Pilate's absent from this point in the story on, which I think is just what he wants. It's certainly what his wife wanted, verse 19. Pilate was sitting on the judge's seat. His wife sent him this message: "Don't have anything to do with that innocent man, for I have suffered a great deal today in a dream because of him." The Pilate is done with Jesus for now. He's got out of the bind he was in, but not how he wanted to. He thought Jesus was innocent. Verse 23, he asked, "Why? What crime has he committed?" But he gives in to the demands of the crowd. If Jesus really is innocent, well then Pilate can't be innocent. That's Pilate. Next we meet these people, the crowd. The crowd were the ones in the moment in Pilate's story who forced Pilate's hand. What's their story in this story? Verse 17, the crowd gathers. Verse 18, Pilate thinks they're acting out of self-interest. And then down in verse 20, the crowd, they're certainly easily swayed. They get to choose which prisoner gets released at Passover time in this custom, that long-standing Jewish custom that a prisoner would be released. And yet they don't really choose. Look, they're persuaded, verse 20, the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd to ask for Barabbas and to have Jesus executed. And so they become like this mob rioting. Crucify him, they yell. Verse 24, they're even caught up in the moment. And they say, here's Jesus' blood be on us and on our children. They take responsibility. They're proudly reveling in being part of the death of Jesus. It's somewhat barbaric, isn't it? Later in verse 39, we read of those who passed by, crowd members, hurled insults at him, shaking their heads, saying, you who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God. It's mockery. The crowds revel in their contribution to Jesus' death. They mock him for his claim of being God's chosen son, of being the bridge between God and man, humanity. This new place, this new way for people to know God, a new temple. Jesus is mocked for any claim to such things. He's mocked for what has become the heart of the Easter story. He's mocked for why we are here today. He's mocked as he dies the death that in advance he said he was going to die, that people needed, that people would need in order to have a relationship restored with God again, access to God like they had in the temple, but better. Jesus' death and resurrection, he claims, is the 3-day temple destruction and rebuilding event. It's a bold claim. He's claiming to be a whole new way to God. Access, fully restored, presence with God available through him. That's the story of the crowd. Next we meet Barabbas, the convicted criminal. And he comes across in some ways in this story as a bit of a hero. He's released, freed. How good would it be to be Barabbas? And yet he is a convicted criminal. Verse 15, it was the governor's custom at the festival to release a prisoner chosen by the crowd. And at that time, they had a well-known prisoner whose name was Jesus Barabbas. So when the crowd had gathered, Pilate asked them, which one do you want me to release to you, Jesus Barabbas or Jesus who's called the Messiah? Verse 21, the crowds demand that Barabbas be released. This man named Barabbas, son of the Father, whose first name Matthew tells us is also Jesus. The other Jesus, he'd just claimed to be the son of the Father, the King, the Christ of God. And so he stands on trial for blasphemy, for causing an uprising, which is one of the charges that Barabbas, the criminal, was on trial for, insurrection, causing rioting. Imagine Barabbas as he hears the crowd outside. He knows he's guilty of the most heinous crimes, but he hears his name. Who should I release? Barabbas. Me. Verse 26. Then Pilate released Barabbas to them, and so Barabbas gets to go free. Jesus is flogged and handed over to be crucified. A convicted criminal, notorious, known by the people, goes free. You know, that very wood of Jesus' cross may well have been the wood that was Barabbas' spot. And yet Jesus claimed that his death is for people like that man, like Barabbas. Guilty people. Guilty not just in the eyes of the Jewish and Roman law, but guilty in the eyes of God, who can be freed eternally by the Good Friday death of Jesus in our place. And so there's our first 3 perspectives.
The second Bible reading is from Matthew chapter 7, verse 27. Then the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the Praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. They stripped him and put a scarlet robe on him, and then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on his head. They put a staff in his right hand, and they knelt in front of him and mocked him. "Hail, King of the Jews," they said. They spit on him and took the staff and struck him on the head again and again. After they had mocked him, they took off the robe and put on his own clothes, and they led him away to crucify him. As they were going out, they met a man from Cyrene named Simon, and they forced him to carry the cross. They came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. There they offered Jesus wine to drink, mixed with gall. But after tasting it, he refused to drink it. When they had crucified him, they divided up his clothes by casting lots. And sitting down, they kept watch over him there. Above his head, they placed the written charge against him: "This is Jesus, King of the Jews." 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right and one on his left. Those who passed by hurled insults at him, shaking their heads and saying, "You who are going to destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. Come down from the cross if you are the Son of God." In the same way, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders mocked him. "He saved others," they said, "but he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross, and we'll believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he wants him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" In the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him.
In that little section, we meet our next 3 witnesses to this story, this account, beginning with the soldiers. And the soldiers really get a close-up view of what's going on, don't they? This momentous day, they would hear and see the grimaces on Jesus' face and his cries of anguish in this most horrible form of death, of torture. Verse 27, the governor's soldiers took Jesus into the Praetorium and gathered the whole company of soldiers around him. So they create this scene, they gather people around to witness and even be part of this event of Jesus' death. Make it into something of a ceremony, a game even. Verse 28, they stripped him, put this scarlet robe on him, symbolic of royalty. They're dressing him up to mock him for his claims of kingship. "Hail, King of the Jews," they mock. They spit and they strike him. Before stripping him and leading him away to be crucified, all symbolic of what they think of him, or at least what they've been influenced to believe about his claims, this is for the soldiers an opportunity, or has become an opportunity for them to display their strength. Treating this man like child's play. Verse 35, casting lots, rolling dice to see who wins his clothes as souvenirs. Verse 37, mocking him with this sign, "the King of the Jews." You can hear their laughter and their scorn through the sounds of the nails as they attach that sign. They're sounding a warning. Do not stand against Rome. One expert on Roman history, Martin Hegel, says, he talks of the supreme efficacy of crucifixion as a deterrent against crime. The supreme efficacy of crucifixion as a deterrent against crime. They're sounding this warning. Do not stand against Rome, against us, the soldiers, and what we represent. But at the same time, the soldiers are acting like schoolyard bullies. They're strong, powerful, brutal, and yet maybe underneath there's some insecurity here. Influenced by all around them, making a show, puppets of the Roman machine, and so they're dismissive of this Jesus, who even in death is no real physical threat to Rome. That's the soldiers. Then we meet these 2 men, 2 criminals. Verse 38, 2 rebels were crucified with him, one on his right, one on his left. And a little later we read, in the same way, the rebels who were crucified with him also heaped insults on him. Now, these two men, they're just like Barabbas, only they get no free pass. They get a unique angle on Jesus' death, certainly. And we know from Luke's account that one, in the end, stuck up for Jesus' innocence, but Matthew simply tells us of their insults. Is this not as low as an insult could possibly get? A true plank in the eye kind of moment? A convicted criminal who is dying, using their last breath to have a go at a fellow criminal. Such is the impact, the possible blinding effects of sin in the world and in our lives, of how we see things. How skewed our reality can become. How distinct Jesus was in the middle of these two men. How distinct he was from them. Still silent as they yell their insults at him, not even responding to the mockery. The unique angle of these two men. And then we meet these men, the religious elites. These are the men who had looked for evidence against Jesus. Tried to work out how they could get him. They'd been trying that for many years. And then they bring him before Pilate with this charge of blasphemy. Verse 12, they accuse him. When he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, he gave no answer. Verse 20, the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowd. That's their involvement here. We can only assume they add their voices to the crowd's voice of crucify him, crucify him. But they don't leave it there. These men whose job it is to uphold righteousness and the Jewish law and the practices of God's people, the standards. Verse 41, they mock. He saved others. But he can't save himself. He's the King of Israel. Let him come down now from the cross. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him if he wants. But he said, I am the Son of God. They don't even address Jesus by name here. He. They've come to gloat in their achievement of getting him to this point of death. They've got their man. They think God doesn't care for him or want him. See, to them, a crucified Messiah, that is unthinkable. And so they have zero belief that Jesus will come down from the cross in this moment. And it seems they would have zero belief even if he did come down. Because what's their issue? What's the barrier to belief for them? It's not evidence, it's envy of what this man has said and claimed, and the crowds that had come to him. And yet, what would happen to these men if they headed back to their own temple? What's happened there? Well, at the temple, at that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. As Jesus breathes his last, the temple curtain is torn, removed. These men who are in charge of the temple and basically have made their job maintaining the dividing lines between people and God, they've kept the purity and holiness laws, but God has done something while they've been out mocking Jesus. Just at the moment Jesus breathes his last, the temple curtain gets torn in two. See, Good Friday is good because Jesus opens the way. He opens our access to God. He stands in our place as he stood in Barabbas' place to deal with the sin problem. The problem that meant we could not stand in the presence of God. We couldn't enter through that curtain. But now the curtain, the dividing barrier, is gone. We can access God through this man Jesus. So what will these Jewish religious experts do? Will they get out their sewing machines and quickly stitch back up that curtain as best they can to make sure that they maintain power and people can't get to God? What will we do? What will we do in response to them and what we've seen here? Well, let's have our next reading before we meet our next three people. I think Angelica's going to come and read that for us.
The death of Jesus. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over all the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately, one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, "Now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him." And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from bottom to top, from top to bottom. The earth shook, the rocks split, and the tombs broke open. The bodies of many holy people who had died were raised to life. They came out of the tombs after Jesus' resurrection and went into the holy city and appeared to many people. When the centurion and those around with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." Many women were there watching from a distance. They had followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons.
So next we meet the man at the center of this account, Jesus himself. What's Jesus' unique perspective throughout this story? What have we seen? For the most part, he's been silent. He seems to be a victim. But we mustn't mistake his silence for just giving in to his fate, as if it's outside his control. Back when the high priest questioned him, the high priest said to him, "I charge you under oath, by the living God, tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God." "You have said so." But then Jesus goes on, "I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." Jesus is in control. He knows what's coming and is moving towards it even. And then again before Pilate, "Are you the King of the Jews?" "You've said so," Jesus replied. "You have said so." See, Jesus' responses and his silence all points to how he knows he must go through this. It may not be fair, it may not be an appropriate use of power, but Jesus is resolute. Verse 45, amidst the afternoon darkness, what does he cry? "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani." My God, why have you forsaken me?" This is why he's been silent. He's been committed to bearing the consequences of sin, of God-forsakenness, abandonment of relationship, which has a deep and real pain, even beyond the pain of the physical in this moment. Hence this cry, echoing the words of the great King David. Jesus is identifying himself as God's anointed king, like David, but greater, a suffering king, a servant of the people. And so the mockery throughout this story, ironically, is right. He really does believe he's the king, their king even, yet a king who would suffer willingly. And their response is just to mock more. But not everyone. We meet another man. Verse 54, this man, the centurion. When the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and all that had happened, they were terrified and exclaimed, "Surely he was the Son of God." From this guy's perspective, a commander of about 100 soldiers, he is a master of crucifixion, an expert. And yet in this death, he sees something different to the many deaths he would have witnessed and been responsible to have charge over before. This man is a man of standing. He has lots to lose. Notice there's others with him. They would hear his profession. Surely this man was different to the others we've crucified, the Son of God even. A divine one. Because in Greco-Roman thought, a son of a god, like the son of an emperor, had at least a partial divinity status. They inherit some divinity. He thinks that at least of Jesus, probably more, the Son of God. He believes that Jesus is the one mocked for being the Son of God, and that he actually was the Son of God, that the mockery was wrong. But it's not just him who has a response of faith here. We meet the women. Many women were there, watching from a distance. They'd followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. Among them were Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's sons. The women stay on, watching on when the others have deserted. They watch on concerned for him, and yet they're risking their own life and their reputation by even just being there, being connected to this failed king. Maybe they hope there's still more in this story. What will happen next? Just their presence in this scene, in this moment, is a response of faith, of hope. That's the story of the women. But I said there was 10 responses, and we've come to the end of the section. So who's number 10? Well, we could maybe consider the people of the cities around who felt the earthquake and their response, though we don't really find out much about them. We could consider Simon, who had to carry the cross. We could go back and consider Judas and his role in leading Jesus to this point. But instead, I want us to consider a different perspective, our perspective. What's your response as you've heard this, witnessed this, read these words? See, the Easter story is not just a famous Christian tradition that means we get hot cross buns from December 26th to today and maybe the next couple of weeks. Now, they're nice, that's good. But it's not just because of that. No, this is a story that is deeply rooted in the ancient documents of history that continues to demand a response for us today. Remember what Jesus asked Peter? Peter, who do you say that I am? Others say all sorts of things, but who do you say I am? Well, that's the question the whole account asks of us. Who do you say Jesus is? If he's Christ, Messiah, God's anointed king, who's come to rescue the world from sin, then we must consider that seriously. Are we the beneficiaries of what he did as king and saviour? If he's still king, are we under his rule? You know, we might not have committed insurrection and murder like Barabbas, but we're more like Barabbas than we are like Jesus. We've all led a personal uprising of some kind against God at some point in our lives. Maybe we still are. We've rioted against him, if not against other people. And so on this day, we need to consider the question, why would God do this? Why would this event happen of Jesus' death? Why would God allow it? The accounts clearly point to Jesus willingly going to his death, and this being part of God's plan for humanity and for Jesus. That's the Good Friday story, and it's a familiar story, and yet one we've got to consider seriously. He did this for us. He did this for us. And so what is our response to this story? Where do you find yourself in this story? How do you answer this question? Who do you say I am? Because that's the question that Good Friday demands we answer. Who do we say Jesus is? And our response changes everything. It changes everything. And it should, because of the significance of this moment, of these events, and what we've seen in the testimony of all these people who've been around it. And so let me challenge you this morning. As you consider this Easter weekend, would you consider this question? Who do you say Jesus is? What's your perspective on this story? And how is that changing your everyday life? Let me pray. Father God, we thank you for this Jesus. We thank you that he went to the cross willingly, silently, and he stood accused. And he did it for us. You took him there that we might be forgiven. Should we trust in him? Should we identify with him? We pray that we might be people who are freed by what he's done, by trusting in him. And if that's already the reality for us, that we will live out that freedom to continue to praise and worship you for the greatness of what you've done. Amen.